How long had the children of Israel wanted to be out of the land of Egypt? They had prayed for someone to come. They were slaves in that land. They had cried before an almighty God, God, bring us out. Moses himself had looked at the circumstance, had became angry about the way his fellow brothers and sisters were being treated, had done so until he actually killed a man over it. And when God looked at him and said, okay, boy, you think this is wrong? You think it's an injustice? You're the guy I have chosen to lead them out. What did he do? Did he jump up and say, oh, here am I, Lord, send me? No, he started to make excuses. Started to make excuses. I've never found an excuse to be an expression of faith. Never. Never found excuses. 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, verse 7, says this about faith. For we walk by faith, not by sight. So what's the second thing we were looking at? What is faith? It's the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. The opposite of faith is what? Sight. There's a little phenomenon called an optical illusion. When you look at something and you may see something that you don't think is there, or, you're not seeing the thing that's there. That's what he's talking about here. Moses could not see how in the world that he could go back to Egypt, come before Pharaoh, and tell Pharaoh, okay, we're getting out of here. Because God said, we're getting out of here. And we're going back to our house. We're not going to be slaves in your house anymore. We're not going to live this way anymore. And he looked at every reason that he shouldn't do it. He made up some. And God gave him an answer for every one. How many of you have been there? That is a turning point of whether you're going to believe the illusion of what you see, or you're going to trust what God said. It's a big place, isn't it? Now, what's the potential of faith? When you don't allow sight or your perception to keep you from doing what God wanted you to do, but you really allow faith to step up. That reality of the things you hope for and the evidences of things not seen. John, the 14th chapter, verse 2, simply says this. I assure you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do. And he will do even greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. Did you catch that? That is the potential of faith. Jesus said, I give you a promise. I promise you. If you believe me, you trust me, you will step out by faith, you will follow me, if you will join me in what I am doing, when I reveal that to you, and you do the works that I'm already doing. Did you catch that? I've already been working on this. And now it's time for you to get on board on working on this. If you do the works that I am doing, then what will happen? Greater things will happen. Greater works, even greater works than these will happen. Why? Because I'm going to the Father, and you'll quit just following me by sight, and you'll follow me by faith. By faith. How many's ever said, well, God, you just show me something I can see, and I'll believe you? Put out those fleeces. And then God does it. I mean, maybe he makes the fleece dry on a wet floor, or he makes a wet fleece on a dry floor, and you say, God, can you do something else? I mean, have you ever done that? I mean, that's not the way we tempt. That's one of the ways we tempt God. Now, what is the danger of the lack of faith? What happens when we don't exercise faith and we don't join God in what he is doing? Well, Isaiah says a little bit about that, or recorded that for us in the 7th chapter of the book of Isaiah, verse 9. And this is what it says. If you do not stand firm in your faith, then you will not stand at all. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. If Moses had not, in his crisis, followed God, would God have got the children of Israel out of Egypt? Sure, he would have. But Moses would have been defeated in his life. He would have. Now, I know God's a God of second chances and opportunities, folks. But don't settle for less than what God has for you. Don't do that. An encounter with God requires faith. Folks, it does. Secondly, encounters with God are God-sized. I talked about that just a moment ago. When God reveals himself, his purpose, it will be something that only God can do, folks. Now, I've asked you this question before, and almost always we get this one wrong, okay? Will God ever ask you to do something that you cannot do? Now, most of you say, well, God wouldn't ask you to do something you can't do. But the correct answer is, God will always ask you to do things that you can't do. Because if you could do them, wouldn't be any problem. But if you have to depend on God and let God do them and you joining God in what he's doing, then what happens? You see God in a whole different light, don't you? You see him in a whole different light. God will always ask you to do things that you can't do because he wants to glorify himself by accomplishing through you something that you did not think could happen. He does. He does. Give me some examples of that, preacher. Well, Moses could not have parted the Red Sea or produced water from the rock. But God used Moses to do it, didn't he? Now, you think Moses would have said that, oh man, Red Sea, that's no big problem. Or water from a rock with a staff, man, no big problem. No, he said, somebody told you he was going to do that. What were the children of Israel saying when Moses was dealing with the Red Sea? They saying, well, listen, you should have left us back in the land of Egypt. We had better places back there. Moses was just scared to death. He said, well, maybe we ought to just stand here still and see what God does. And God finally spoke and said, Moses, I told you to go forward. I told you to take the children of Israel out. And he stepped down to the sea and he stepped into the sea. And guess what happened? The waters parted. What if Moses had run by fear and went back towards Egypt? Every one of them would have died because Pharaoh was upset. They were mad because the firstborn of all their children, all their cows, everything had died, and they were wanting revenge. But God used that body of water to protect them, and that water would not have parted if Moses had not believed God and stepped out by faith. Because he knew he couldn't do it. They were up against a rock in a hard place. But God did it. Something else only God could do. Joshua could not bring down the city walls, nor was Joshua able in the midst of battle to cause the sun to stand still. But God could. And he used Joshua to accomplish those two tasks. But that was Moses and Joshua. One day, Jesus was standing with some 12 guys who they said, we will follow you. There's none other that we can follow. And they stood there one day with a multitude of over 5,000 there who were hungry and needing food. And the only thing in the world that they had found was a small boy's lunch. What did the disciples say? Well, this is not anything amongst so many. But Jesus said, you've brought it to me. Now trust me. And he broke it. And he gave to his disciples. And they fed the multitudes. And guess what? Every one of them came back with a basket full. 12 baskets full. What can God do with people who will step out by faith